Hey guys, welcome back to another Planet Mithril Paints, and today we're painting something a bit different in the form of Tom Bombadil, an incredibly powerful being who aids our young hobbits when they find themselves being attacked by the ghastly Barrowights. We hope you enjoy. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Start off base coating all of Tom Bombadil's face and hands with Bugman's Glow. Layer over now with a mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone. Once the wash is dry, relayer over again with the previous Bugman's Glow Cadian Flesh Tone mix, leaving the right clone flesh shade showing in the recesses, down the sides of his nose, inner cheek areas and between the fingers. Highlight now with pure Cadian Flesh Tone. Now you want to accentuate his round face by focusing on the outer areas of the cheeks and defining his mouth area. You can also further define his fingers here by separating out each individual finger with the flesh tone. Highlight further with a mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Pallid Witch Flesh. This brings the skin tone up nicely, and when applied again to the outer cheek areas and lips, it can really give this jovial figure the roundness that befits his character. At this point here, you can apply a glaze of Carroburg Crimson solely to his cheeks to give them a flushed look, but this is purely optional. Add more Pallid Witch Flesh for the final edge highlight on the flesh. Focus on the uppermost areas of skin, including the bridge and nostrils around his nose, upper cheekbones and the knuckle joints down his fingers. You can also pick out the eyes here with Abaddon Black and Pallid Witch Flesh. Base coat all of Tom's big bushy beard and hair with Rhinox hide. Make sure you cover all the undersides of the hair in order to maintain a consistent base coat. Layer over all the hair now with a mix of Rhinox hide and Gawthor brown. Once the wash is dried, relayer with the previous Rhinox Gawthor mix. Now you want to start blocking out the larger clumps of hair and beard, leaving the Agrak Thirst shade showing in the deepest recesses to create a natural sense of depth and shadow. Highlight the hair now by adding more Gawthor brown to the previous mix, and start separating out all the individual hairs across his beard and hairline. There is an awful lot of beard, but the sculpt is very well defined and very forgiving, so take your time here and keep your paint application in long, unbroken streaks as much as you can in order to give a natural flow to all this fella's hair. Finally, apply a fine edge highlight using pure Gawthor brown to the upper and outer curls of hair and beard, as well as the tips of the hair that cascade down his front and back. This sculpt of Tom Bombadil looks almost exactly how you'd expect a typical garden gnome to look. We're going to try our best to reflect this with bright colours that befit his personality and the lore, but not so bright that they look unnatural once the model has been finished. Start by base coating his big pointy hat with Doomball brown. Layer over the entire hat with a mix of Doomball brown and Tuskwall fur. You don't strictly need to catch the underside of the hat droop here, as it will help to further define the shading later on down the highlighting process. Once the wash is dried, relayer with the previous mix, taking care to leave the wash showing in the creases of material as the hat folds back on itself, as well as the innermost groove where the brim meets the bulk of the hat. Highlight the hat now using pure Tuskwall fur. Start to further define the creases in material by pushing this towards the upper and outer areas of the hat. Aside from a few defined creases, there isn't an awful amount of defined detail here to work with, so take your time to define for yourself where these highlights need to be applied in an effective way to create texture. Finally, apply a fine edge highlight with a mix of Tuskwall fur and padded witch flesh. Focus it on the outer folds and absolute edge of the brim of the hat, and further define the highlights you applied in the previous stage by keeping your highlights as tight and thin as possible. We want to make sure the inner tunic looks different to the browns we use for the hat, but also stays muted and natural enough to best reflect this magical man. It's a very delicate balance to strike whilst also trying to bring enough vibrancy and all-round brighter hue to the palette. Base coat the inner tunic on Tom with Mournfang Brown. This is the lovely rich chocolatey brown which is perfect for the look we want for this celestial being. Apply a layer with a mix of Mournfang Brown and Deathclaw Brown. The Deathclaw lifts the already rich hue of the Mournfang in a really striking and natural way, which will help it complement the louder colours we're going to be using very shortly. Once the wash is dried, relayer with the previous Mournfang Deathclaw Brown mix, leaving the wash showing in the deepest recesses of the material. Make sure the wash also sits in the seam running down the front of his tunic and the groove where his round tongue meets the edges of his belt to create a natural shadow across his slightly rotund figure. Add more Deathclaw Brown to the mix for the first highlight stage and further define the outer and larger surface areas of his tunic. Now we want to apply a highlight using pure Deathclaw Brown, further defining the flow of the tunic as it falls against his knees, and tracing around the outer curve of his stomach to define the outer curve of Tom's physique. Finally, apply an edge highlight with a mix of Deathclaw Brown and Pallid Witch Flesh, and again further define the absolute edges and outer folds of material. The result should give you a very complementary looking tunic which blends in well with the palette we use for his very gnomish looking hat. Carefully pick up the belt across his midsection with dry bark. Apply an edge highlight to the belt using pure Gawthor Brown. Finally, carefully pick out the round belt buckle using lead belcher. Paint Tom's trousers with a mix of Storm Vermin fur and Abaddon black. Once the wash is dried, relayer with the previous mix, but adding a small amount more of storm vermin fur. Finally, apply a quick edge highlight to the kneecaps and sides of his trousers with pure storm vermin fur. Now we're moving on to probably the most vibrant area of the Tom Bombadil model, his bright yellow boots, which stand apart from anything else on the model and anything else we've painted previously. This creates a really nice focal point and a spot colour when contrasted to the browns we've currently been using, and further reinforces his gnomish look. Base coat the boots using Avalan Sunset. In order to maintain a smooth finish, you may need to apply this in a few thin down layers. Once the wash is dried, layer over with a mix of Avalan Sunset and Phalanx Yellow, leaving the wash showing in the recesses. We washed the boots earlier than we normally would, as we didn't want to tone these down too much compared to the rest of the model. This allows the brighter pigments of the yellows we're using to really shine through. Apply another layer now by adding more Phalanx Yellow to the previous mix, further defining the larger surface areas and outer folds of the boot material. You're probably sitting there thinking, whoa, this is going to be way too bright, what madness is this? Trust us, the overall effect once the model is finished will all tie together really nicely. Now apply a highlight to the boots with pure Phalanx Yellow. We're opting for brighter yellows as opposed to richer yellows for these highlight stages, as they help add to his almost ethereal disposition and in our opinion really help to capture the character from the books. Finally, apply a fine edge highlight using Dawn Yellow to the outer areas of the toes and sides of the boots, as well as defining more of the outermost folds of the boots and just helping them to pop that little bit more. Now we're going to further accentuate the richness of Tom's garb with his bright, vibrant blue coat that he wears, which when finished will really complement well against the vibrancy of the yellow boots we've just finished. To start off, base coat Tom's jacket with a mix of Macragge Blue and Kaeldor Sky. The Kaeldor Sky just softens the Macragge ever so slightly and provides a good base for the pastel-y highlights to come. Again, to maintain a smooth finish you may want to apply this in a few thin down coats. We're using a very rich blue hue for the base coat and the first layering stages, and transitioning to a more pastel look as the highlight progresses. Layer over the whole coat now by adding in some Calgar blue to the previous mix. This now helps to push that pastel look and further softens the harshness of the Macragge. Once the wash is dried, relayer with the previous mix, leaving the Drakenhof nightshade showing in the deepest recesses down the length of the coat, small of his back, seams and creases in the sleeves. Continue to add more Calgar blue to the mix for the next few highlight stages. At every stage, focus more and more on defining the outer and upper creases of material to further reinforce the shadow and shading we want the coat to have. This is easier around more of the defined folds where his arms are, but more challenging down the length of his back where the definition of the sculpt is sadly more lacking in comparison. Now, we're going to whole hog on these pastel hues we mentioned earlier. Add some Fenrisian grey to the overall mix for the next highlight stage, and further push the definition of the highlights marked out from the previous stage. Finally, apply an extreme edge highlight to the absolute crest of all material folds, as well as the innermost seams and edges of the jacket with pure Fenrisian grey. Finally, paint the huge feather protruding from his hat and the strap around the base of his hat with Rakarth flesh. Be careful with the strap not to clip the already finished hat as we did. But that's what editing's for, right? It's not in the video, ergo it didn't happen, right? Once the wash is dried, apply a layer now with a mix of Rakarth flesh and Palibwitch flesh. Carefully pick out the individual feather strands down the length of the feather, leaving the wash showing in the recesses. Finally, add a pinpoint dot highlight to the edges of the feather and an edge highlight to the strap with pure Palibwitch flesh. And there we have it, Tom Bombadil, finished and ready to stand guard over his domain with his faithful companion Goldberry, ready to help any wandering hobbits that might find themselves in trouble.